Reed Richards hears an impossible equation whispered from the cosmic background. Coordinates to a burning empire where billions pray into static. He recognizes the pattern as a distress metric disguised as noise, and decides that leaving it unanswered would be cowardice measured in dead cities. He powers the bridge, an interdimensional transit of negative zone geometry, tuning it to the signal's warp harmonic. Susan sets the containment lattice. Johnny climbs the thermal ramp, and Ben bolts the anchor into the reinforced deck. Pressure goes thin. Taste of iron. Lights bow inward. The breach takes them. They fall out of a screaming sky over a hive world called Gallicosta, its night lit by refinery flares and funeral pyres. Wind peels at their suits. A failing macro hauler breaks in the upper atmosphere, 10 kilometers long, each fracture a firestorm. The debris map resolves in Reed's retinal overlay. Tracks of heat, vectors of death, a cascade heading for Spire Theta 7. Population, 17 million. He calls assignments without poetry. Susan goes invisible at a whisper and thrusts her hands outward. Force geometry blossoms into a miles-wide honeycomb under the largest fragment. Metal screams across her lattice. Her nose bleeds instantly. The load is planetary. Johnny becomes a white core and draws a contrail as he cuts to intercept a spin-stabilized engine block, then dives, then climbs again, carving vector wedges that turn mass into skittering rain. Ben rides a broken spine of ferrocrete through superheated hail, lands on the roof of a pilgrim hospital, and shouldering plates thicker than bunker doors, props the collapsing landing deck as ambulances flood out beneath him. Atmosphere hammers them. The city's vox nets spike with prayers and orders. Pict feeds grab faces and miracles, naming them angels and heretics in the same breath. An orbital defense station rotates cold cannon to face the newcomers. Augurs list power signatures with no imperial code. A bored-looking mid-sun admiral in peak cap leans to his display and orders identification by hails, warnings by macro, and, if no answer, actual fire. Down below, the governor orders her shield domes to full and clutches a rosary of gilded cogs. Reed's voice is calm as he pushes math under Susan's palms. She shapes her lattice into an arrow break, then a cup, then a fluted horn to bleed heat to the sides and not down into the spire. The fragment rides and screams. She winces, holds, sets a second field under a falling transport laden with promethium tanks and half a regiment of conscripts. Johnny cuts the transport's tail to reduce spin and flashes a warning arc to its pilot. The pilot salutes through tears. Ben grinds his feet into ferrocrete, finds a superstructure rib, and pushes. The deck relevels by degrees. He looks up and meets the eyes of a novice sister dragging a gurney. She nods, unafraid, face smudged, lips moving in a litany. He nods back and takes another breath. The first debris wave ablates in a controlled fan across the empty industrial quarter beyond the spire. The second wave strikes Susan's lattice and shreds into slag, then flows around the force field wedge into a canal. Steam drives sideways into the habs. Johnny darts to detonate a loose cluster mid-air, eats the blast, and reappears, teeth clenched, voice a strained rasp. Still here, the macro hauler's main spine, 5 kilometers of girders and ore, tumbles with a procession Reed can't vector out. He calculates the break he needs and the failure it will cause. Ben, he says. Ben hears the mass of the thing in Reed's tone and answers with a grunt that means yes. He leaps spire to spire, drops onto a municipal crane that creaks at his weight, and yanks the entire assembly over, bending it into an improvised keepsake hook. "Sue," Reed says. "Kneel." She drops, palms to the searing roof, and expands a field under the tumbling spine that just kisses Ben's hook tip. The field buckles like glass under a boot. She screams once. The spine slows. Ben's arms shudder. Johnny flares full and slams a thermal wedge into the spine's flank. It slides into the hook. The city holds. Smoke smothers color. People in the street stare at the sky and drop to their knees. A voxcaster on a cathedral tower calls their names wrong and blesses them anyway. The admiral delays his order to fire. The governor tells her bodyguards to lower weapons and raises a hand toward the sky like she can steady it with her fingers. Far below, under the hive, something answers the breach. A tremor rolls through the foundations. Auspex arrays scream. On pict feeds in the governor's palace, dark obelisks push up through sump ice and trash strata, each face engraved with equations that make tech scribes sweat. Hexagram pylons light in sequence. The sewers flash boil. A pariah hush spreads through the underhabs. Psychers clutch their eyes and go silent forever. The city's astropathic choir shrieks and goes mute, like a choir cut by a single blade. The skin world opens, and a black gate, cut along angles that refuse to stay counted, steps into existence amid the irrigation caverns. Figures of living metal walk out as if waking from a long, dry sleep. Their optics are starved gems in skulls of tarnished jade. They begin to advance, wordless, efficient, assembling their ranks with timeless contempt. Reed hears the silence hit him like a physics problem with no variables. "We have an intrusion," he says. "Non-emissive matter. Pariah field. Psi null. Necron." The name means nothing to Johnny, and everything to no one. But the inquisitorial channel listening to the governor's palace tightens its grip on a rosette. The governor demands a situation report from the underhive. It comes as a video of a minehead opening into darkness, and the camera going blind as its signal decays into a dull hum. The admiral orders his strike craft into ready status and loads boarding torpedoes with storm adepts and pageantry. In a side chapel, a confessor anoints rifles and raises a reliquary alleged to weep oil. Reed calibrates his bridge's residue, a latticework echo still humming with negative zone energy, against the black gate. "They're using a dolmen transit," he says to no one but everyone. "That gate is not ours." But both are ruptures in the same ocean. He looks at Susan, and she looks back. They know this is on them. Ben lets the hospital deck down, gentle as a put-down glass. "We going underground," he says, like a weather forecast. Johnny circles once over the governor's palace with slow wings to show intent. Not raiders, not angels, just 4 people. He lands on the plaza and burns a line in the cobbles that says, "Talk." They get 2 emissaries, the governor in dust-streaked carapace, and a woman in black with a rosette that could unmake families. The woman, the Inquisitor, watches them like a puzzle that probably contains knives. She is named Inquisitor Verity Hest, Ordo Xenos, and she has already sent 3 kill teams to die in those tunnels as a test. She is formidable and uninterested in mercy as an argument. Reed gives her a clean bow. "We're the Richards expedition," he says, because calling them heroes feels embarrassing and wrong. "We intercepted a distress metric. We came to help. Help is heretical without sanction," the Inquisitor says. "Sanction us after," Susan says, voice raw, sleeve soaked from her own noseblood. "Now we hold your city." The governor's lips part. She sees the faces of 17 million people in her mind. "You will do it," she says. "I will answer for it." The Inquisitor studies the governor for 2 seconds and makes a note. She turns to Reed. "You will descend with an escort of my choosing. You will obey command net and declare all assets." Her gaze flicks to the device on his back. Still faintly humming, bridge coils caged in force braces. "You will report the nature of that abomination." "It's how we got here," Reed answers. "It can be how they get out. Or in." She smiles without mirth. "Down." They drop into the city's throat with a platoon of steel-booted Kasrkin, and the Inquisitor ghosting behind like a second thought. Johnny runs advance, a star spark cutting light in the dark, killing cameras and waking things that remember heat in a bad way. Ben is the center of gravity. Susan is the barely seen margin that catches bullets and gas jets. Reed is the moving map. Necron warriors phase through walls with a sound like a throat clearing in a dead cathedral. The first engagement is clean and ugly. Johnny's fire peels after images across plasteel ribs. Ben breaks a thing's spine with a two-fisted hammer that costs him a shower of sparks from some internal fault. Their kind of pain. Susan tilts a force lens and captures a ghost bead stream, deflecting it into a reinforced sluice that turns red. Reed tests a harmonic pulse against a warrior chest cavity and watches its rib lattice flare, then settle. Wrong frequency. Again, right there. Too much. They retreat deliberately, then advance where the Gauss arcs are weakest, cutting through sump corridors with markings in a script that never was human. The pariah hush pushes at Susan's fields. They feel slow, like moving underwater with lead gloves. The Kosakin form a wedge and hold it, burning authoritative lines with hellguns and believing in orders until orders stop working. Then the Cryptek arrives. He does not announce. He is a negative equation written in a man's shape, moving with the arrogance of a solved proof. A staff of star-eaten metal twists in his hand. A null prism hangs at his chest, drinking light. When he lifts the staff, space glitches. Susan sees the trick and counters. The staff's beam is not heat or force, but an instruction. Be less. Her field ripples and cross-fails, then collapses. Not broken, merely unimplied. The first hit takes Reed in the shoulder as he drags a wounded trooper out of a firing line. It is not a burn or a cut. It is subtraction. His arm contracts to its normal length with a horror that is anti-joy. He staggers. Johnny rages and becomes a column of flare hotter than a tank's death. But when it touches the Cryptek's prism, the flame gutters cold. Ben charges because the only answer left is contact. The Cryptek steps sideways without moving, and the staff kisses Ben's chest. The rock skin around the kiss goes dusty. For one raw heartbeat, Ben feels human again in that spot. Soft and brutally vulnerable. We break him together, Susan says, and erects a dome that bends the Cryptek's strange light. Reed recalibrates in pain, finds a frequency that is not force, but structure, a knitting wave, and feeds it into Susan's dome. It hardens in ways math shouldn't. Johnny goes dark and becomes heat in the invisible. He stops glowing and becomes a hook saw of convection currents that the prism can't drink because there is nothing to see. Ben feints a charge, then slams a knee into the deck and sends fissures through the ground that tilt the Cryptek off balance by a fraction of a thought. The dome holds. The staff's second order, be still, fails against its tessellation. Susan's nose bleeds harder. This is not a parlor trick. This is her skull as a lever. Reed's shoulder is a field of needles, but he drives the knitting wave harder. And as the Cryptek tries a third instruction, be past, the dome's geometry insists on now. They hurt him, not much, but enough to crack his elegance. He turns, acknowledges them as a new problem, and reaches with his other hand. It is not a gesture. It is a proposition. Reed sees it as a cascade of possible solutions to the war below. He sees infrastructure made efficient by generations of work, not wasted on religion. He sees the mind of a species that solved death by leaving it behind. A logic trap in the shape of progress. It fields to him because his ethic is making the future hurt less. It promises him that hurt ends if he stops believing in the flexible mess of people. Read, Susan says. I know, he says. And because refusal is a function of cost, the Cryptek charges him the price anyway. The proposition lances through Reed's bridge coil and lights it. The echo of negative space energy screams through the tunnel. Reed's device sings a note that pulls at every transit gate on the world and says, open, open, open. Hex pylons answer. The dolmen gate deepens. Imperial Vox explodes into orders. The Inquisitor swears in a language older than cathedrals. Seal all lower doors, she says. Shrine third class to ready status. Summon the choir to intone the Aegis. A chorus rises through stone. It is 50 throats with cracked lips, bound eyes, and faith used like armor. singing in High Gothic, a pattern that Maggie the astropath learned from a teacher she will outlive because she has to. The song draws lines the enemy's math cannot pry apart. The dolmen gate shimmers, and the deep tone of it changes key. It is still wrong, but less. Johnny claws heat out of air he already burned and sends it into seams. Ben drops low and slams both fists into the ground, over and over, making the whole underhive shake until dust falls like judgment. Susan reshapes the dome into a spear, then a plane, then a nothing that behaves like a wall. Reed pulls the bridge coil off his back, hands shaking, and inverts its polarity with a prayer to math. "This will yank," he warns. "Hold to something alive." He slams the inverted bridge down. The coil barks and eats itself. The dolmen gate jumps like a fish on a line. The cryptek lunges and his prism explodes into a wound in light. The gate rips. For a second, the tunnel is a throat between two unkind oceans. Everything living huddles around the hymn. The gate snaps shut. The hex pylons go dark. The cryptek falls backward through matter and vanishes, but not before his staff's last order grazes Reed's side and writes a future bruise into present. Reed collapses to one knee, laughing once, too close to a sob. Silence then, only dripping and the minor key noise of cooling things. A storm adept dies at Susan's feet, his lungs unclenching after the hymn. The Inquisitor approaches, rosette in her fist, eyes like knives and compassion locked behind a duty older than her bones. "First victory," she says, tasting the words like iron. "First debt." They withdraw to the War Council Hall, a vaulted chamber under a domed fresco of saints who never came here. They sit. The governor thanks them in a voice that shakes once and never again. The admiral addresses them by unit designation, because names get men killed. The Mechanicus Magos, connected by cable and incense, lists violations in Binharic music with a courteous tone that hides knives. The Inquisitor watches and says little. They debate, slow and sharp. The governor wants civilian corridors safeguarded and shrine vaults held. The admiral wants to take the fight to the tunnels with lance batteries burning the substructure. He is willing to sacrifice 3 hives to save a continent because he counts in macro. The Magos wants the negative space coil sequestered, cataloged, and never used again. Reed says the coil is dead. The Magos calls that a relief and a lie, both. "Your methods save lives," the governor tells Reed, and nods to Susan and Johnny and Ben. They also open doors. Her jaw tightens. Doors to places we have spent 10,000 years nailing shut. "Your empire is dying by inches," Reed answers. "And it is not cruel. It is an admission. You ration light. You burn futures to heat pasts. If you have a way to hold all the doors closed forever, I haven't seen it. If you don't, you need to teach your children to walk through one. Children burn in those doors," the Inquisitor says, quiet. Her eyes don't leave him. "Mercy kills more worlds than malice in my line of work." Johnny stares at the fresco. "Your line of work needs better PR," he says, then grimaces at himself, at the barb that felt wrong here. He clears his throat. "We get it. But we're still going to stop people from dying if there's a way. Praise for action, anxiety for doctrine," the Magos murmurs. Repeatable pattern. Machine spirits dislike it. An alarm cuts the debate. Auspex shows activity far out system. A translation ripple tears the void into a neat wound. A vector of black ships with angles that make crewmen's eyes wet runs in like a whisper. The Necron return to finish with heavier tools. The city's people read their hands and see lifelines thinning. The Inquisitor clicks 2 beads together and orders shrine defenses to the Sacred Red Plan. They set a real plan. The Richards group will act as a mobile reserve, plugging breaches, snapping enemy lines, buying minutes that add to hours. The Admiral will hold orbit, throwing steel back down the well if any alien lifts. The Inquisitor will gather the choir and the Null Adepts and forge a counter hymn to stand where Reed's device tore a scar. The Magos will bless the city's reactors and awaken a relic no one wants to use. A cyclonic option with a saint's name engraved on the shroud. The second wave hurts differently. It is smarter, slower, willing to lose so it can win a calculus Reed hates, because it is the calculus that wins wars writ large. The cryptech does not return in person. Instead, Scarab clouds with a new algorithm chew at Susan's constructs like rules lawyers. Johnny's flame throws shadows that turn into hands. Ben's blows take longer to end things that are too patient to fear pain. Reed feels whispers long after the gate shut. Propositions shaped like blueprints, tempting him toward clean solutions that erase people who make the numbers uncomfortable. He refuses just as often as he accepts his own guilt for wanting to say yes. Refusal costs. He shakes and hides it. Susan watches and says nothing until later in the dark. They hold the city. The first night ends with smoke and a sunrise people actually see. The second day begins with funerals and rations, and the industrial hives venting steam like incense. Newscants call the four angels, witches, foreign abhumans, saviors. All true, none complete. An order arrives from far above the governor's seal. The Inquisitor reads it in a private room and returns with the same face she always has, which is the comfort she gives the people who trust her. An audience, she says. You will go to Terra. The governor protests that the city needs them. The Inquisitor says Terra needs to know what they are. Reed glances at the coil's charred cage and calculates that leaving will buy Gallicosta a week of breathing before the next pattern. The Admiral gifts them a frigate with an old reliable Geller field and a choir that can hum a path through the warp without too much screaming. The voyage is pageantry cut with triage. Serfs handle void lines with prayers and grease. Mechanists chant over drives that remember better centuries. The custodian on loan to ensure protocol is a statue made of rules in gold. In the chapel, Susan sits with a chaplain who prefers questions to sermons. He is a paladin if paladins had oil under their nails. He asks her if she believes in salvation. She answers that she believes in keeping people alive so they can decide what salvation is later. He mulls that for a day and replies that perhaps that is a form of faith. Ben plays cards with Voidsman and wins, and gives his winnings to the mess. They laugh like men who don't get many jokes. Johnny stares at a star field while an astropath shows him with careful language how to look at it without letting it look back. Reed reads and fails to sleep because numbers whisper, and he is tired of wanting the best answer more than the right one. Mid-transit, the mirror finds them. The Geller field hums steady, then shifts fractionally. The choir coughs blood and sings louder. On the bridge Pictsphere, four figures assemble out of lens flare and wrong proportions. They are a version of the four, tuned to this galaxy's cruelty. Reed sees himself translated by a god of change into something steel-slick, mined like a weapon with the safety shaved off. Susan sees a queen of knives who hides worlds under her skin. Johnny sees a star that learned hunger and forgot warmth. Ben sees an engine wearing his face and never stopping, because stopping would mean feeling. They talk in the slow cadence of tempting prophets. You need rules that work, the other Reed says. You need optimizations that admit what people are, variables that average out. Stop setting high expectations. Build systems that expect failure. Then you can save more. Merit without mercy is math for tyrants, Reed says. He believes it fits in a sentence. He hopes it fits in his heart. You call it mercy, Mirror Susan says. But your mercy clogs our gears. In your world you can choose, because your gods stayed out. Here, gods are teeth. Choose and be bitten. Johnny flares a little. We leave the light on, he says, because he has to say something that is his. Light attracts moths, Mirror Johnny answers. Moths burn. How many? Ben steps forward. We ain't moths, he says. We're people. And people keep going. He tilts his chin to the mirror Ben. You forgot that part. They clash in a short fight no one enjoys. It is high concept by necessity. Field against field. Option against option. An argument written in pressure and heat instead of paragraphs. Susan realizes her counterpart's blades are cut from the fear of losing her family. She refuses that fear, steps into it, and her field becomes a sanctuary instead of a shield. Johnny realizes his counterpart is made of all the times fire was easier than talking. He dims and glows and dims again until he is a steady burn. Useful, unshowy, enough. Reed catches a blow he can't see and nearly folds into an algorithm. The choir breaks on a note, then a relic on the bridge, an old reliquary cog with a drop of oil inside, winks with nothing supernatural. Only human hands that polished it for centuries and refuse to forget why. The warp gives way. The mirror withdraws, leaving words like hooks. You will come around. You will learn. Reach the throne, the custodian says afterward. More prayer than order. They arrive at Terra after weeks that feel like years. Pageantry blooms on auspex and at windows. Fortress moons, dock cathedrals, rings of defense that look like jewelry you could cut a planet's throat with. Gold-armored giants whose shadows have rank. Nulls walk in the procession with their terrible grace, and everything quiets around them, even thoughts. The four feel small in a way New York never made them feel. They pass through gates that have seen Primarchs and traitors both. They pass frescoes of victories and cover-ups painted with equal care. They pass a hall of names and a hall of weapons. At last, they enter a chamber that is not a room so much as an act of worship. The throne's antechamber, all steps and light, and golden machines doing a job no one remembers starting. A roar like oceans never heard fills the human part of the brain with awe. The Emperor does not speak, not in sound, but in pressure and clarity, and the weight of a choice that could break continents. The audience is silent, and also entirely not. Numinous exchange is as precise as a physicist's diagram, and as subjective as a saint's vision. Reed stands and offers what they are. Susan stands and offers what they won't be. Johnny stands and offers warmth that is not naivety. Ben stands and offers stubbornness that does not bow, only kneels to lift others. The Emperor answers with 3 paths. The return is simple on the surface. Go home. The bridge can bend one more time if Reed lets it draw blood from a friend, a choice he cannot outsource. They can forget what they saw in exacting degrees, memories drained to preserve clean lines back there. They can go back to a world where saving one city is a headline, not a sin. The risk is that forgetting the price of mercy will make them mercifully careless. The free agent path is illustrious and catastrophic. They keep their freedom. They build on the edges. They run an underground of hope, saving worlds outside sanction and tearing protocols apart where protocols strangle. They will be the heroes of songs and the start of schisms, a light sailors aim for, and a light warlords use as a target. The risk is civil war, born not of malice, but of intention. The sanctioned servant path is heavy and bright. They accept oaths. They wear a sigil that makes the guns look away and draws the knives closer. They get access, forges, fleets, libraries of burnt and rewritten truths. They lose autonomy on paper and discover where autonomy actually lives. The risk is becoming careful to the point of uselessness. The Empire's caution turning their hope into a ceremony. It is not a test, so much as a measurement. The blood price logic is not hidden here. It is the air. Reed wants to choose freedom and build laboratories in the night to only answer to the problem. Susan wants to choose home and raise her son by a sky that is not hostile. Johnny wants to choose anything that lets him do the right thing without being told, which is youth written in fire. Ben wants to choose the thing that keeps him carrying rubble with someone under it. They choose together because that is how they work. Sanctioned, with clauses. They state them aloud like law, because law is power if you intend to obey it. First clause. They will prioritize civilian lives in all theaters, and their command will include authority to countermand tactics that treat colonies as acceptable losses when other options exist. Second clause. They will not hand over Reed's methods to minds that will use them to build better cages. Mechanicus oversight will be real oversight, not theft. Third clause. Sue's fields will never be used to torture prisoners. Their work will not normalize cruelty by making it cleaner. Fourth clause. Johnny will restrain himself when heat would feel good but do harm. Fifth clause. Ben will be allowed to say no when a plan asks him to be more monster than man. The Emperor answers in pressure. He accepts the clauses in the way a mountain accepts climbers, without moving, but with permission to ascend if they know what ascent costs. Custodians step forward. A blank leans close and writes a cold clarity in their bones so that when whispers of optimization come, they will recognize them. A tech priest anoints Reed's coil housing with sanctioned sigils that are not chains, but warnings. A confessor places a relic in Susan's hand, a small metal 4 with an aquila worked into its negative space, old and sturdy. They are inducted without theater into the theater of wars. The visual transformation is simple and huge. Their emblem becomes the Imperial 4, 4 wings wrapped inside an aquila's spread. Their suit plating bears the rosette's shadow. Their command net call sign becomes Auxilia Quadrant 4. Their masks are still their faces. The mentor, the paladin chaplain, nods once and says acceptance without using the word. He repeats their clauses to them because vows are not remembered by the day's ceremony, but by the days after. He adds one of his own. They will call him when dogma tries to eat duty, and he will call them when zeal tries to eat sense. They return to Gallicosta not as rogue angels, but as sanctioned anomalies with paperwork heavy enough to deflect some bullets. The governor kisses the rosette stamped over the 4 when she thinks no one watches. The inquisitor nods like she lost an argument with a decent outcome and writes a reserve clause that lets her shoot them if they betray. The admiral welcomes them to his order of necessary people. The Magos grumbles, then builds a cradle for Reed's rebuilt coil that mutters prayers instead of orders. The Necron react with machine patience. They change the problem set. The Cryptek returns with a weapon that suppresses memory in a radius, a conceptual toxin that erases motives and leaves movement. Sue braces her mind around a null that is also a promise and keeps a company of soldiers remembering why they are here. Johnny burns in neat lines that don't cook the coolant towers the city needs to not explode. Ben plays anchor to a world that wants to tip. Reed faces the Cryptek again with math he pulled from a hymn. He discovered that the choir's aegis is not magic, but consensus. The power of enough minds agreeing on a boundary condition the warp must accept, because the warp is partly mind. He writes a field based on civic consent, a defended perimeter defined by the people who live within it. A civic consent equation. It hurts to think, because it asks him to admit that democracy is a physics model as much as a moral one. Progress with consent, he says. Optimization with votes. The Cryptek cannot parse the inefficiency and loses a microsecond waiting to. It is enough. They win more days than they lose. They do not win forever, because forever isn't offered here. The epilogue is not peace, but position. Rival factions move like weather. The Mechanicus divides itself into those who see in Reed a saint of acceptable heresy, and those who see a variable they will not allow. The Inquisition splits into the predictable camps. Someone will write a dossier titled The 4, Medical, Political, Esoteric Risks, and someone else will annotate it with respect and a fatal recommendation, crossed out. A black ship charts a course that notches the city into its world route with a box drawn around Auxilia Quadrant 4. Potential interference. The alien watches. In a tomb-silent realm, a Necron lord taps a lacquered claw against a dead star map and orders a tesseract labyrinth built to fit a stretching man. In a pleasure cult city that is an article of an argument, A Drukhari Archon laughs at recordings of a woman whose shields imply she would taste of resolve. In a distant underrealm called the Negative Zone, a king named Annihilus looks up at a thread of math that twitched once and wonders which mammal tugged it. On a throne that is also a wound, a god that calls itself change sends dreams that look like favors to men and women too tired to refuse them. And in the streets of Gallicosta, children wear charms that are small, metal 4S crossed with an aquila, and old men argue if that is idolatry or gratitude or both. On a wall near the Pilgrim Hospital where Ben first held the sky, someone paints a symbol, the aquila's wings wrapped around a circle with 4 cuts, all of it ringed by a wreath of cog teeth. It is not official heraldry. It is a language for civilians to tell each other where to go when the sirens sound. Night comes. The city breathes. Reed works in a corner with a chalk and a prayer to equations that don't eat people. Susan sleeps for 10 minutes and dreams of a quiet kitchen that is holy because it is quiet. Johnny writes a list of names of people he saved and people he didn't because both matter. Ben sits on a rooftop and looks up at a golden light far away that is not for him. He lifts his hand like he did that first day, and the hand is steady. Tomorrow, new problems. Tonight, the ember. In a galaxy written in the grammar of war, 4 stubborn syllables keep getting said. We're here now. Sirens cleave the night before dawn. The city's vox breaks into clipped orders and breathless prayers. Reed is already on his feet, chalk snapping in his fist. Susan throws on armor and tastes copper. Johnny is mid-list, pen falling. Ben stands, the rooftop groaning, and says a word that means work. Raiders dive out of a tear in air above the Pilgrim District, not Necron. Meaner in color and joy, knife-sleek skimmers rake the alleys with hooks that pull people up like fish. Masks grin. Laughter sounds like someone else's pain. The webway node blossoms in the old cistern where the cryptex gate once sang. Drukhari, the Inquisitor says on the command net. Cabal scale incursion. They smell blood. She does not shout. She moves 3 regiments on a grid with a finger. Auxilia Quadrant 4, intercept. Johnny is fire without flourish. He pours heat into the nearest skimmer's grav vein. Not enough to cook the passengers. Just enough to make the craft list hard and slide into a market awning. Screams. He hates that sound. He hates the next sound more, nets snapping. Ben hits the plaza like a dropped anvil. He catches a barbed cable with both hands and leans. Hooks bite stone. The skimmer bucks. He plants and pulls. The cable rips out of the sky with a shower of black scales and dragged masks. He flings it into a fountain, water hissing, and steps in front of a school door like a wall that grew legs. Susan steps into the center of an intersection and lifts both arms. The air coalesces. A dome blooms. Not hard glass this time, but a sanctuary. Thin where soldiers stand. Thick around the kneeling. Shaped by a thought she can hold if she doesn't blink. Shuriken storms slither and die on its skin. Her headache arrives like an old debt. Reed runs. Breath measured. Mind switching languages. He maps the webway node by heat shear, by sound delay, by the echo of wrong geometry he learned yesterday. The tier's edge flickers like a candle in a draft. He wants a plug. He wants a vote. He hails the governor on a civilian band. Open the district page, he says. Broadcast, stand. Choose. This block is yours. He hears the governor's breath. Clipped. He hears her say it. Voice steady. He feeds her words into an equation. The tier narrows by a millimeter. Cabalites leap from skis and cut at Susan's threshold with vibro edges that eat rules. A homunculus watches from the skimmer's shadow, hands stained to the elbow with old fun. He raises a spider thing that chirps in a frequency that makes teeth itch. Susan's sanctuary shivers. She keeps it up by naming faces. Child with braid, baker with ash on cheek, serf with busted boot. The names are her scaffolds. Johnny pushes heat low, under the cobbles, warping the ground into soft glass so landing raiders slip. He edges flames away from a line of promethium drums, stacked like saints' bones. He counts breaths. He gives himself a number for when to push harder. He stays below it. Ben hears a scream, thin and old. He follows it into a side street where a Talos engine slurps around a corner like a bad decision. It drips light and tools. He picks up a delivery van and hurls it like a stubborn argument. The Talos eats it and grins with the wrong surface. Ben spits and goes in close. The engine likes that. It has a saw for that. Ben takes the hit on stone ribs, grunts, and leverages the whole thing into the brick with both hands until something inside cracks like a sinner's confession. The homunculus smiles wider. He flutters 2 fingers. A death mark resolves from air like a bad thought. Green lens open. Its rifle is a line that joins Reed's skull to a dot. Susan feels the intention like cold. She swallows pain and throws a lens sideways. The shot hits her sanctuary and writes a black curve. 3 more lines join it. The curve almost closes. "Move," she says. Reed shifts without demanding why. The next shot takes his old chalk outline. He keeps moving. He feeds the governor's words into his civic consent field generator and drives 2 stakes into the cobbles. People inside the plaza repeat the phrase they just heard. Not with faith, but with irritation and tired love. The field thickens. The homunculus is disappointed. He reaches into his cart and pulls out something that looks like a glass heart with chains. Tesseract toy. He purrs to no one, to the air. Borrowed. Let's box the clever one. A Necron rune crawls across the heart's skin. Reed sees it and hates that every alien in the neighborhood wants his head for a different shelf. The heart opens. Space folds into a polite cube with sides that hum. It hops toward him like an eager dog. "Ben," Reed says. Ben arrives mid-hop. He doesn't punch it. He palms it like a ball, muscles swelling. It is not heavy. It is indifferent. He squeezes anyway, growling, and the cube's edges squeal. It writes a negative value for force. He keeps squeezing, because that is his reply to all math that forgets people. The cube warps, then leaps away, offended, and snaps shut on a bolt gun casing. The casing vanishes. The cube burps. The homunculus laughs, delighted. He throws 3 more. The null maidens arrive as if the city held its breath and exhaled frost. No herald, no cry, just blank, quiet walking. Charcoals and pale faces. Swords like the end of a sentence. They head straight for the webway tear. The air around them stops writhing. Screams lower. A daemonette peels half out of a sliver above the cistern, sees them, and changes its mind. The Drukhari flinch. Some do, the ones with thinner skins. The homunculus does not. He studies the blanks like a painter measuring a line. He tosses a last cube at Susan. She can't spare a hand to swat it. Johnny streaks, shoulder checks the cube with the heatless body, and shifts its vector into the fountain. It snaps shut under 3 feet of water. The water freezes and shatters. Johnny shivers. He does not glow. He hates not glowing. He stays dim. Reed can close the node. The numbers are reachable. The risk is the cryptek scar singing in sympathy, and every dolmen in range checking in. He weighs the city against the galaxy, as if that scale were fair. He thinks of the clauses. He chooses the one that cost him permission to enter this room. Choir, he says on the net. I need a phrase. The chaplain is already there, mouth set. He lifts a vox set like a ciborium. The astropathic choir in the basilica answers with rough unison. Reed gives them 4 words and a rhythm. The words are not holy, they are civic. This ground is ours. He stacks them into resonance. He ties them to the null's wake. The node tightens, fussing. The homunculus senses the closing. He throws a last hook into the crowd and snags a child. He pulls. The child rises, eyes huge, ankles bleeding. Susan shifts the sanctuary to make a tongue that catches the hook's barb without slicing the child's skin. She holds both ends and tears the metal slowly until it gives. She hands the kid to a sister of silence, who does not smile. The sister nods once and carries the child out with gentleness you can't look at. The webway returns to being a wall with a bad memory. Drukhari skimmers slew away. Shuriken chatter fades like insects. The homunculus bows, a little too deep, promising future hate. He steps backward through a slit and is gone. Aftermath smells of coolant and blood. The Inquisitor walks the plaza and counts the living by habit. The governor kneels in the cistern's shadow and thanks people by name until her voice is a whisper. The Admiral's gun cutters chase skinny traces into high cloud and come back with nothing, because that is how raids work. They convene in a shattered refectory still warm from soup. The chaplain pours water for everyone with the solemnity of a rite. The debate is shorter now. Edges were rubbed blunt by shared risk. The Inquisitor still worries at the coil like a terrier at a bone. Your field, she says to Reed, is a hymn that doesn't kneel. Useful. Disturbing. It worked because it belongs to them, he answers, nodding toward the door where evac teams carry old folks out on doors and banners. Not to me. Ownership breeds obligation, the governor says softly. Good. The Magos glides in, trailing incense and a servo skull whispering Binharik. Analysis complete, he lies, because analysis is never complete. Necron glyphs co-opted by Xenos perversion. Classic. Delightful. We must sequester a shard of your field for study. No, Susan says, polite, immovable. We all remember the clause. Memory is fallible. The Magos counters. Not ours, Ben says. He taps his temple. We got blanks now. Cold keeps. Johnny finally allows himself to glow a little, mostly for warmth. He looks small under the refectory's cracked mural of saints, tearing demons with banners. Reed, he says, you're gonna have to reopen that thing someday, aren't you? Yes, Reed says. When we do, I want our hands on the lever. And I want a crowd that knows we're doing it. The Inquisitor looks at the chaplain. The chaplain looks at her. Something like friendship that refuses the name is there. You will need gear, she says, to Reed now. Not heretical. Adaptable. You will go to Lamed 7, Forge World. They'll dress you with things that obey. Lamed 7 will also try to own you, the governor says. She has been owned before. She knows the taste. Take my seal. It won't stop them. It will slow them enough to write a sentence before they write you. The frigate lifts into a thin morning. Children on rooftops hold up 4 fingers and a twist of thumb for the Aquila. Ben waves a slab of hand. He pretends not to see his symbol painted clumsy on 10 walls. He sees it. He feels the weight. He carries it like another beam. The warp is a dull ache. The mirror does not come this time. Perhaps it waits where 3 lines cross. Lamed 7 appears on scope, a red planet plated in cathedrals of iron. Smelter smoke is weather. Manufactory ringing litanies into the dust. They land in a sink of lamps, where statues of the Omnissiah stare with 100 eyes. A procession meets them. Tech priests with faces like patient knives. Skitarii with mirrored visors. Servo skulls tasting the air. The Archmago speaks with a vocabulary that excluded warmth centuries ago. Sanction recognized. Clauses archived. Auxiliary Quadrant 4. Welcome to obedience. We prefer cooperation, Reed says. Cooperation is obedience with better manners. The Archmagos replies. Come. We will not hurt you without cause. He pauses exactly long enough, and cause is unlikely. They enter the Hall of Improvements. It is a museum and a crime scene. Racks of archaeotech glare. Venerable engines sleep under prayer blankets. Siblings of Reed's coil, less elegant, more cruel, hang in nets with warning runes burned into their frames. The Archmagos shows them a gauntlet that fingers gravity without permission, a shield buckler that eats light in a licensed way, a lance that harmonizes with the hymn Aegis. They choose carefully. Susan declines invasive field amplifiers designed to interface at the spine. She takes a ring of focusing filaments she can clip to her sleeve, and a relic clasp once owned by a sister, cold with the memory of silenced rooms. Johnny rejects a thermal overcharger that would make him loud and stupid. He accepts a regulator that caps his flare by design, and a meter he straps over his heart like a promise. Ben walks past exoframes that would make him stronger by putting steel in the places the world sees stone. He picks up a plain servo harness for lifting heavy things delicately. He keeps it. Reed accepts a scepter of harmonic tuning that resonates with civic consent fields without supplanting their source. He refuses a cortical jack with a polite gesture and, when pressed, with a story about a city that died because a smart man forgot to ask permission. The Archimagos respects the story academically. He installs locks anyway, seals that will fuse if the tools are turned into cruelty. The alert comes through the forge's stone with a note Lamed 7 hates. A request for help from a black ship pinned by raiders in the Merrick's belt. Souls aboard. Cargo hostile to everything. Pirates cut their way in with song and knives. The nearest crusade fleet is weeks out. The frigate that brought the four can reach them in hours. The chaplain does not need to ask. The custodian steps up from a shadow and says the obvious. Go. The admiral, linked by Vox, already moving a chessboard that spans star systems, gives a vector and a window. The Inquisitor gives a sanction that tastes like liability. The governor will not hear of this until it is done. The Archimagos wraps the scepter in a prayer foil and hands it to Reed like a father giving a dangerous toy to a child he can't stop from growing. They translate into a debris field painted in corpse light. The black ship hangs with its Geller field sputtering, hull printed with sigils and warnings, port side peeled like a tin of meat. Slaver barges ride close, spitting hooks. Drukhari again, but with friends. A pale crescent cruiser glides in. Eldari make, not dark. A craftworlder ship holding distance with disdain. Its guns cold. Its presence a statement. We watch. Why aren't they helping? Johnny asks. Because the math is different for them, the chaplain says. Because they did the equation already and hated their own answer. Boarding action is ugly geometry. Reed insists on entry point options. One hard, one soft. Hard. Ben opens a door the raiders think is theirs. Soft. Susan presses a tunnel out of choked smoke and fear. Johnny rides between, temperature gradient cutting fog like a wedge. The custodian joins them, gold in gloom. His spear one more operating rule. They enter a corridor where the air smells like incense and lightning. Sisters of Silence stand in a half circle around a terrified knot of children. A succubus dances in front of them, weapons dripping. She bows at the gold statue with amusement and flicks blood from a blade at Susan's feet. I've always wanted to cut a story, she says. The story moves first. The custodian is old precision. He does not roar. He steps and ends motion with economy. The succubus meets him with hunger and glee. Their fight writes letters in air. Johnny cuts off angles. Ben becomes a door no one passes. Susan layers sanctuary over the children, him running under her skin, ring filaments thrumming. Reed looks down a passage where crying chambers hum. He feels a pressure like a negotiation. He finds the homunculus from the plaza, now in an operating theater bright as a lie. The glass heart sits on a tray. It hums with interest. Engineer, the Xenos says, delighted. Do you love them enough to ruin them? We can make it quiet. No more screams, no more flailing. Your coil, our nerve. A beautiful cage. Reed pretends to consider. It is not pretend. He wants quiet. He wants it so much it scares him. He looks at the cube heart. He sees a city with no crime because no one can imagine crime. He sees consent without option. He tastes ash. No, he says, and sets the scepter against the theater's floor. The scepter thrums with the civic tone. He calls the ship, not its engines, its people. This ground is ours. He whispers into the bulkheads, into the prayer-scratched rail, into the sisters' clenched knuckles. into the children who do not have a word for duty yet. The field rises like a simple fact. The glass heart protests. The homunculus laughs and frowns at once. He flicks a switch. Pain engines hang in the corners like flowers. They awaken. The scepter hums harder. Reed sweats. The field ripples. A boy says the phrase back, small. Two more voices join. A sister, silent by nature, is silent, which here counts as agreement. The field hardens. The pain engines skip a beat. The cube hops. It doesn't like being excluded from ownership. Ben arrives and steps on it. It chirps. He stays stepping. Back in the corridor, the succubus takes a line on the custodian's throat and meets a blade designed to end Primarch legends. Gold beats silk. She dies, smiling, as if that is the point. Johnny's regulator keeps him from boiling the children by accident. He hates it and thanks it. Susan redistributes the sanctuary to follow a sister who picks up a child with the same care as the day before. Drukhari break and flee. They leave gifts. Spiders, gas, laughter. The four leave nothing but a singe pattern and a promise not to come back, if not asked. The Craft World cruiser shifts its weight on Auspex like a judge turning a page. A Farseer's mind touches Reed's in a glide of polite discomfort. You complicate probability, the thought says. You make bright lines where the threads want to tangle. People do that, Reed answers. He is surprised he can reply. It's why I like them. Keep liking them, the Farseer says, and severs the thought with something that might be mercy. They escort the black ship toward a safer vector. The Inquisitor takes custody with paperwork that could build a city if you made it into bricks. She says thank you like a verdict. The chaplain cleans his spear and hums. The custodian walks the decks and says nothing at all. There is a price. 2 of the choir go blind for an hour. 1 does not get his sight back. Reed vomits quietly in a sink and turns off the water, slowly. Susan sleeps 12 minutes and wakes to adjust a stretcher strap on a child. Johnny stands on a viewing blister and watches the Craft World ship shimmer and go. Ben sits with a sister who cannot speak and doesn't need to. They share a silence that calls itself strength. Back on Gallicosta, the symbol is everywhere now, because civilians decide what language means before heralds do. The governor signs an order making the mark unofficially tolerated, so no one goes to prison for drawing hope. The Inquisitor signs 2 orders. One that opens resources to the 4. One that opens a file titled Contingency, Quadrant 4, with a lock that needs 3 codes. The Admiral moves his fleets like hands folding laundry no one will wear again. He tucks Gallicosta deeper under guns and hopes the universe respects effort. The Mechanicus is not quiet. A doctrinal cell rallies around Reed's idea of consent fields, calling the pattern the quadratic aegis, and writing treatises with burnable edges. Another cell writes a counter, citing 6,000 years of reasons why Vox democracy is treachery, disguised as music. The Archmagos pretends to be above it, while privately commissioning 2 experimental shrine emitters that only function if 1,000 citizens hum in tune. He does not tell anyone. He knows the clause. He builds them anyway. He bolts a conscience patch on top. Necrons adjust. Death marks begin to appear where Reed will be, not where he is. The Cryptek forges a staff end that speaks in apathy, not subtraction. It says, "Why tire?" Reed feels it from 3 streets away and sits down for a moment he cannot account for. Susan touches his shoulder, and the feeling goes. Not because of love, though that is there, but because her field knows how to outline a person. So he shows up again. Chaos notices, because chaos always does. A sorcerer of a bird god scratches a feather on obsidian and watches 4 lines bend away from a war it wanted. It sends a dream to an aide in the governor's staff that looks like a promotion and tastes like dust. The aide wakes and hates his ambition for an hour, then forgives himself. The dream returns 3 nights in a row. The 4th night, Susan finds him on a balcony and says the word choice in a voice that makes it heavy. He does not take the promotion. The sorcerer's feather scratches elsewhere. The mirror waits. It sends no avatars. It leans at the edge of Reed's eye during quiet work and writes alternatives into his chalk when he is tired. Reed corrects them reflexively and then stops, looks, and writes beside them a second answer that uses people instead of assuming them. It is slower. It leaves mess. He likes it anyway. He keeps the first chalk mark on the board as a reminder of what comes fast. The Emperor does not speak again. He does not have to. The oath lives like a splint on a healing bone. A month passes, measured by sirens and sleep. The city's market opens in fits. A parade that isn't called a parade moves past the pilgrim hospital with bread in baskets and kids on shoulders. Ben watches from a roof and eats something that is mostly fried sugar. Johnny teaches a teenager to light a candle without burning a prayer book. Susan visits the choir with medicine and small talk and leaves with a headache that is not only hers. Reed writes to himself in a hand steadier than he feels. Keep asking. Keep checking. Don't optimize love. An alert arrives with the bite of real danger. Not a raid. A cull. A tomb city under the salt flats west of Gallicosta stirs to full wake. A monolith rises like a black tooth and sends a beam of knotlight into the sky. Transmission repeats across the subsector. The Admiral cannot cover all. The Inquisitor cannot be everywhere. The Governor cannot evacuate that many people before the algebra turns red. We split, Reed says in the war room, hating the word because it makes them less than some. Johnny and Susan to the flats. Ben with me to the canal tunnels. Two problems need two answers. No, Susan says, because she counts in people, not problems. Three answers. We bring the city. She looks at the Governor. Let us borrow your voice. They make a plan that will look like madness in a book and like hope in a street. The quadratic aegis will extend beyond a plaza, beyond a ship, over a district, if enough people agree. Not believe. Agree to own. The Governor sends runners and opens channels that normally carry ration orders and weather lies. The chaplain trains 1,000 throats to a beat that feels like walking. The mechanicus pretends to be offended and prints horns that carry sound without unsanctioned harmonics. The sisters approve with silence. The battle opens with precision, not fury. Johnny takes the sky and writes cool shade over pilgrims moving under the sun. No display, just utility. Susan carves corridors of safety through areas where death marks wait. Her sanctuary flickering only when she names too many faces too fast. She slows and names fewer with intention. Ben drops into a canal crawl where Necron scarabs feed on pipe metal. He punches water until pressure waves break them, then lifts a gate that men with wrenches couldn't move 10 men deep. Reed takes a ridge above the salt flats, with the scepter planted like a flag. The civic field rises. It is not pretty. It wobbles. It is scratched by Gauss. It holds because a market lady swears she will not leave her stall, and a scribe recites names, and a child says, "mine," at the ground, and means it. The monolith's beam bends. Not much. Then enough to miss a line of evacuees. The cryptech appears. Staff, heavy with apathy. He speaks in a tongue that invites rest. Men sit in the salt, sigh, and lay down their weapons. Reed answers with a story about work he did when he was poor and young and wrong. About a lab that smelled like burnt coffee. About a problem that wouldn't solve until he asked the janitor how he moved a heavy machine by himself. The janitor told him, little by little. With a song, Reed gives the scepter the cadence of a human work song. The field stabilizes. The cryptech frowns, which for his kind is a full scream. Johnny sees a scarab cloud coalesce into a blade headed for Susan's back. He burns a hole in himself, regulator bucking, so he can dump heat sideways without boiling the evacuees below. He flares like a signal, and for a second, he is the old, careless son. He drags it back. His chest hurts. He smiles anyway, because restraint worked. Ben reaches a chamber where a tesseract labyrinth is already awake. It yawns like a polite throat. It wants him because he is simple in the best way, and traps love honest lines. He reaches back. He finds the servo harness. He clips it to an overhead rail with hands that remember brick, and lifts the whole apparatus out of its cradle like a mechanic lifting an engine to see where the leak lives. The labyrinth hums in indignation. He swings it, grunting, and jams it back into its own stand at a wrong angle. It judders and collapses into a flat plate that reads, "Null." He sits on it until it stops caring. Susan faces a Necron lord with a staff taller than she is. Its head a frame holding a fragment of night. It reaches through her sanctuary, not with heat, but with inevitability. Her field balks. She changes it. She stops shielding and starts welcoming. She opens a space that says, softly, "You do not belong to this." The Lord hesitates because even machines remember homes. The pause is small. It is enough for a sister to step into the hesitation and end a 10,000-year argument with a single clean cut. Reed sees the pattern shift. The monolith checks a new solution. It begins to teleport infantry behind the field into pockets of helplessness. He hates that problem because it is elegant and cruel. He calls the Admiral. "Orbital," he says. "Not on the monolith. On the shadows it needs." The Admiral understands with the speed of a man who's killed cities and hated it. Macro lasers write lines at the edge of the flats, far enough to avoid pilgrims, close enough to blind arrival vectors. The monolith spits infantry into light and heat, and they arrive with armor hot enough to crawl out of. They do not survive long. The cryptek turns away. Retreat is not in his vocabulary. He learns a new word. They win. Not gloriously. Decently. The monolith withdraws on a rail of wrong light. The salt flats go quiet. The evacuees reach foothills and sit down like people in a park. The governor allows herself to cry where no one can see for 12 seconds, then returns to being the kind of person who doesn't get time for that. The Inquisitor updates the file. The chaplain writes today's hymn variations on a scrap and tucks it into a book that has no title. Night again. The city breathes a little less ragged. Reed looks at the symbol painted on a transport side and thinks about ownership until the thought becomes a feeling. Susan eats with the choir and laughs once at something small. Johnny stands under a vent and lets cool air strip heat from his skin. Ben finds the novice sister from day one and helps her carry a bench upstairs because benches don't carry themselves. Off-world, reactions ripple. A Space Marine chapter master reads a report and snorts, then draws a box around Quadrant 4. Potential liaison, possible liability. An Eldar Farseer plots a skein with a new knot and sighs at the mess humans make when they insist on persisting. The cryptek catalogs errors with a precision that will take centuries to correct, and, for the first time in his long existence, writes beside the column of numbers a symbol that is not a number. A question mark. A creature in the warp that likes change tastes the city's new song and purrs. The Emperor stares at a galaxy that eats hope for breakfast. He does not move. He does not need to. 4 human shapes in sanctioned paint keep walking into bad rooms and making them less bad. Civilians keep humming under their breath when they cross a plaza. A symbol keeps spreading in chalk and oil and carved into mess tables. In the morning, sirens will call again. They will answer. The clauses will chafe. The field will wobble. The math will bite. The ember will hold. And somewhere far from Gallicosta, under a dead moon, a dolmen gate sighs and opens of its own accord. No cryptek command. No human coil. Just momentum. A figure steps through in robes older than empires, eyes like regret. He carries a shard of something that used to be a god. Wrapped in cloth, he refuses to let the warp touch. He looks up at a sky that has forgotten him and starts walking toward the place where a city learned to say, ours.